Jay Sekulow is with us. He's the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice and also counsel to the president, President Trump. To me, this is now going to have a big impact on the election because Supreme Court nominees and Supreme Court justices impact this country for generations to come, Jay.
It's the lasting legacy, Sean, of every president is the selections of judges, in particular Supreme Court justices. I had the honor of appearing before Justice Kennedy for almost 3 decades. And more times than not, he agreed with the position I advocated.
How many times have you argued before the Supreme Court? At least 20, right?
So we've had now, effective after a couple that came down to Olympic cases this week, about 20. And
how of the 20, how many did you win? And by the way, you're not taking on easy cases. You take on really serious, hard, difficult constitutional issues.
I think about 78% of the time we've been successful. I will say this, Justice Kennedy has been generally in our favor on probably 80% of those cases. When he dissented, he did so in a respectful way. That's the way he is as a judge. He did it with reason. We disagreed on the reason, obviously, but he was definitely what I would call a justice that was probably the most pivotal vote on so many cases. Look at this term. Now, this term, he ruled consistently conservative on a lot of cases, not all of them, but on a lot of them.
Well, more than any other justice. For example, Roberts one time has gone with the more left-wing jurist on the court, and Clarence Thomas only 2 times, and Antonin Scalia only 2 times, and Sam Alito never. Absolutely 0.
Well, that's right. And here's what you have with Justice Kennedy. For instance, on the religion clauses, the First Amendment Establishment Clause for exercise of religion, he was most frequently very much pro-religious freedom. You saw that even this term. He also was very good on the speech cases. So I had a lot of those. And some of those were close cases. You saw that most recently in the National Institute for Family Life Advocates. I had a case, the companion case of that, up at the same time. That was up yesterday as well. Now that we won that, my case would be a reversal. So but then there were other issues where he was not consistent with the conservative position. Having said that, the president has a unique opportunity to not only impact the course of the judiciary for generations, but also to appoint a justice in the mold of, and this is what's important here, he's not obligated to appoint a justice in the mold of Justice Kennedy, although Justice Kennedy, on a lot of cases, got it right. But he tends to, President Trump, like the judicial philosophy of Antonin Scalia. You saw that with Justice Gorsuch. I think that's exactly what you're going to see with the next nominee. That type of
how fast? I would assume the president has a short list already, and the president probably knew very well this was a possibility. I mean, rumors now have been running around for 2 weeks about Justice Kennedy. So I would assume the president probably has a name he could put forward any day.
Well, look, any president, this president in particular, is always prepared for what, at the end of the term, happens, and that is justices, especially with an aging court, justices that retire. That's what's happened here. So I know that the president has, I'm sure, a list of names and will put forward a nominee that he feels is most qualified to fill this slot and to advocate a judicial philosophy that matches his position as president of the United States.
Let me go back to Greg Jarrett. I mean, Greg, because the impact of this is now massive. I mean, we've seen so many 5-4 decisions.
Right.
This would almost lock in if the president picked somebody that had a originalist judicial philosophy like Antonin Scalia. This would lock in 5-4 pretty much.
Originalist, textualist, strict constructionist, use any term you want. That was the mold of Antonin Scalia. It's what Clarence Thomas adopts. Alito tends to be that as well. Roberts not so much, but still a conservative, and Gorsuch as well. So you want somebody in that mold, not in the mold of Anthony Kennedy, who was notoriously the swing. You never knew which way he was going to go. And the White House has a huge advantage here because they're experienced in already guiding a nominee successfully through the process in the U.S. Senate. And they already had a list. The president may turn to the second or third or fourth choice that he had behind Gorsuch. And these people have already been well vetted and re-vetted and vetted all over again, because this was no secret that Kennedy was contemplating retirement. Many people thought he'd do it last term. He didn't. He did it this term. So they're well prepared for this. And the president, I guarantee you, will now be running on this issue as he endorses candidates and campaigns across the nation in the run-up to the midterm elections, because all will depend on the U.S. Senate and Republicans holding it.
All right, stay right there. We'll continue with our panel, Jay Sekulow and, of course, Greg Jarrett and David Schoen. All right, as we continue with Jay Sekulow and Greg Jarrett and David Schoen. David, let me get to you. And by the way, we're going to carry you guys into the next half hour. This is just too big a day here, too big a news. And we want to go over the plethora of topics that literally are now potentially covered as a result of Justice Kennedy retiring. David Schoen, you seem to like the fact that he's down the middle. I tend to have a more originalist philosophy, and I don't like judicial activism in any way.
Right. No, I hear you. Look, there's certainly an entire school of judicial philosophers who say predictability in the court should have the premium also, so that we know as lower courts get guidance from the higher court what direction the court's going to go in, and certainly another originalist, as you might call it, would aid that. Listen, you ask Jay Sekulow, he might be the next nominee, frankly, but he certainly would know who it might be.
Except I'm too old.
Yeah, no, I hope not. In any event, though, but he couldn't say it. I want to throw out there, one of the names originally on the president's list before Justice Gorsuch was named was Diane Sykes in the Seventh Circuit. I recently argued a case before her on a panel. She ended up writing the decision in our favor on a voting rights case, ballot access case. She was terrific. I mean, she was as sharp a judge as I have appeared before on an appellate panel in many, many years, many appellate panels. I think that's a name to look out for in any event.
Well, I agree. How many times have you argued now before the Supreme Court?
I haven't argued before the Supreme Court. I've filed many briefs, but I haven't argued there. And Jay Sekulow certainly has and knows the court very well. I'm a student of the court and always have been. And as I say, I was friendly with Justice Souter and others. But
yeah, whatever happened to Justice Souter? He was supposed to be the great originalist himself. He turned out to be a major disappointment, and he regularly votes with the left wing of the court. I mean, he basically has, aligned himself with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer and Elena Kagan and John Paul Stevens and Sonia Sotomayor. That's where he's been over the years.
Sometimes, to me at least, the labels don't hold up necessarily. For example, Justice Scalia.
I was going to say that.
All right, hang on one second. We'll continue. Jay Sekulow, David Schoen, and Greg Jarrett. And Justice Kennedy is now retired. A Supreme Court vacancy now exists. So we'll get to your calls as well. 800-941-SEAN.
Let's go back to making the liberals crazy. The Handman is back on the radio right now.
You create commerce in order to regulate it?
That's not what's going on here, Justice Kennedy, and we're not seeking to defend the law on that basis. In this case, what is being regulated is the method of financing the purchase of health care. That itself is economic activity with substantial effects on interstate commerce. And
so any self-purchasing, anything I purchase, if I'm in any market at all, my failure to purchase something in that market subjects me to regulation.
No, that's not our position at all, Justice Scalia. In the healthcare market, the healthcare market is characterized by the fact that aside from the few groups that Congress chose to exempt from the minimum coverage requirement, those who for religious reasons don't participate, those who are incarcerated, Indian tribes, virtually everybody else is either in that market or will be in that market. And the distinguishing feature of that is that people cannot generally control when they enter that market or what they need when they enter that market.
All right, that was the ACA debate regulation meeting, and of course that decision was lost, and the ACA was considered constitutional, although it was one of the worst decisions, definitely a definitive moment in terms of John Roberts, and it was believed at the last minute that he changed his decision. It had been reported fairly widely because he didn't want the court to be viewed as political in any way as the Chief Justice. Anyway, we continue with Jay Sekulow, the American Center for Law and Justice and counsel to the president. Greg Jarrett is with us, and don't forget his new book is coming out, and it is The Illicit Scheme, the Russia Hoax, the Illicit Scheme to Clear Hillary Clinton and Frame Donald Trump. David Schoen, criminal defense attorney, civil liberties attorney. Jay, that one decision shocked everybody, and especially because the Chief Justice, it had been reported, had changed his mind on that.
Well, it happens, and the fact is that, I think David said this earlier, that sometimes the ideological lines don't mesh so well when it is, in fact, they become a justice of the Supreme Court. So what you want to have or what you want to see is the best you can, and there's never a guarantee that the individual that's been nominated has a clear and concise judicial philosophy respecting the rule of law and respecting the Constitution, that has a view of the Constitution that, in my opinion, you want to call it originalist, if that's the phrase you want to use, that the way you amend the Constitution is to amend it, not by a judicial fiat. So where Justice Kennedy was not a predictable vote, I suspect, and you know that the president is going to be looking for a vote, a justice who will vote in a manner that has a consistent judicial philosophy. Again, you never are 100% sure, Sean. You do the best you can. Look,
you do the best you can. I think the case in point, although he's no longer there, I keep bringing him up, is David Souter. I mean, I think he was one of the.
I mean, how about if you could do that for others too? I mean, how about John Kennedy nominates Byron White to tell you how old I am? I appeared before Byron White, and Byron White was appointed by John Kennedy, was deemed to be a liberal, was going to be a liberal member of the Supreme Court, and was perhaps the most conservative justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. It is during his tenure. So you don't know, but you do have track records now. There's a whole list of appellate judges, and some non-judges too, that have written track records. You understand where they are, and you've got to ask the right questions on judicial philosophy. And I am sure that the White House was prepared and is prepared to move expeditiously on this. There's been. Let
me throw out some names. Yeah, I mean, Brent Kavanagh, have you heard of his name?
Excellent. Yeah, great.
What do you know about him? Or, for example, William Pryor's name. He was brought up the last time. That's another name.
Yeah, Bill was on the short list last time. I've been friends with Bill Pryor, but I've also worked with Bill Pryor, actually. So I've been a great judge of the 11th Circuit. Brett Kavanagh is another one. I knew Brett from his days in the Bush administration, knew him in private practice. We worked some cases together. He's been an excellent judge of the Court of Appeals. I think David mentioned Diane Sykes, another very, very well-respected Court of Appeals nominee, and there'll be some others. So the way it works is there's a list. The White House is constantly working on that list, narrowing it down, and then the president will once again do interviews, and usually the White House counsel participates in all of this, and it'll be narrowed down, and I suspect we'll get a nomination in short order. I don't want to predict the dates. I don't know the date, but none of this is shocking to a White House that is prepared, and this White House counsel's office and the White House. There was a lot of speculation on this, and there has been for a long time. And just the sheer age of the court, you always have to be prepared.
Agree with that as well. What about Paul Clemente? Do you know him?
Yeah, I do. Clemente was the Solicitor General of the United States under George W. Bush. He and I have done probably 4 or 5 cases together at the Supreme Court. Not a judge, excellent lawyer, has a tremendous reputation, would be a excellent Supreme Court justice. Is
there any other name on the short list that you could think of?
There's others out there. Vietin, who's one of the partners of Paul Clemente, could be on a short list for the Supreme Court.
What about Jay Sekulow on the short list? I'm just asking.
Too old, man. You want them in their late 40s, mid 40s, late 40s, early 50s. You don't want old geezers like these 62-year-olds. And I'm plenty busy right now, in case you haven't noticed. So, I think, look, there's a lot of good options out there. What you're looking for is, like I said, I had the privilege of appearing before Justice Kennedy for 3 decades. He ruled with me more times than not. When he disagreed, his dissents were reasoned. I just disagreed with the reasons. What you're looking for now is, I think the president has an opportunity. Someone like a Justice Gorsuch that is, that kind of judicial philosophy. So I think that's what you're looking for here.
Yeah. I look at
men and women that are. There's a lot.
And by the way, this is where
courts that could do this.
This is where elections matter. You know, Greg Jarrett, this is why, this was one of the biggest, that's why I couldn't understand the Never Trumpers.
Right.
Because Donald Trump had promised an originalist, and he said, who are your favorite Supreme Court justices? He said Scalia. And he said Clarence Thomas. He was very clear. And that meant those are the type of justices he'd be looking for. And it appears, by the way, that he found one in Neil Gorsuch.
Right, he did. And look, two things. First of all, he's going to try to get, with the help of Mitch McConnell, to get the nominee through before the November elections. But Democrats will try to obstruct and delay all they possibly can. I mean, the president would love to have somebody seated by the beginning of the term in October. So that is one possibility, but it will only underscore the issue of the U.S. Supreme Court in the midterm elections, even if they get somebody seated ahead of time. Second of all, you want to find somebody, as Jay pointed out, who is younger. For example, Amy Barrett, Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. She was born in 1972. So you would have a woman who is reasonably young who would be on the court for a long time, and that is always important for presidents. That is their legacy. The other thing to point out is that you don't want to whiff. And for goodness sakes, the presidential landscape is littered with Republican presidents who made mistakes. Eisenhower said the two biggest mistakes he ever made were the appointment of William Brennan and Earl Warren, who turned out to be two Supreme Court justices who were liberal. Ronald Reagan was only 1 for 3. He appointed Sandra Day O'Connor as well as Anthony Kennedy.
Yeah. You're right.
I mean, he only got one right, which was Scalia.
Yeah, but the only problem is it's always Republican presidents that get it wrong.
Well, Kennedy appointed Whizzer White.
Okay.
All right.
We have to go back to 1961 to find the one example where a liberal, and Kennedy wasn't even a liberal. I mean, Kennedy, at least on the economy and in many ways, would be judged as a conservative today.
Right.
Let me bring David Schoen back in. David.
Right. You know, one of the reasons I mentioned Dianne Sykes is to the point Greg just made. That is, if you want to move this thing through quickly, and obviously that has to be balanced because it's an important decision, but she's less controversial. She certainly has the president's judicial philosophy, but with all due respect, I mean, Judge Kavanaugh and Judge William Pryor are going to be very controversial decisions because of some things they have said that have been brought up before. Some people thought some of them were the death knell. But let me make this point, because this, to me, is a tremendous program you're doing today. You're providing tremendous educational resource on this subject.
I've been accused of a lot worse, but look, go ahead. Thank you.
So many things these days are polarizing. Let's be clear. You know, sometimes originalist is used as a bad term to the left, or liberal is a bad term to the left. Take a guy like Justice Scalia. I don't suggest you're going to find a duplicate of him, but he had, by all accounts, left and right, he had one of the great minds on the court. And you say he was predictable. On the other hand, who would think that when it comes to a criminal defendant, he would line up with them at times? For him, the confrontation clause, the right to really cross-examine and ferret out the truth, was of key importance to him. Now you might say that's a liberal issue, but it's not. It's a constitutional issue, and that's how he saw it. So some of these, you're not going to find necessarily someone with the depth and breadth that he had. But let's be clear, you know, we don't mean these words as bad words. He was a guy who thought through the issues, and that's how he came down.
But Jay, let's be very blunt and very honest here. I mean, knowing, you know, the borking of Robert Bork, I mean, we go back there, you know, there was probably no greater, smarter judicial mind ever that was more qualified to actually be on the Supreme Court. But then Ted Kennedy, you know, it's now become a verb, if you will, or you know, borking, and literally they demonize this man in such an unfair, inaccurate way. It seems that if anybody has a history of writings on judicial philosophy or ideology or thought, it's almost a death knell for them.
Yeah, they can't do that anymore for two reasons. Number one, the rules of the Senate are now simple majority, so 50 plus 1, and that person is confirmed. Number two, the media landscape today is much different than it was during Robert Bork's era, in large part to what you're doing and what your colleagues do, both on TV and radio, and that has changed a lot of the way the perception goes and also how media controls. So I think what you're looking at is you're going to see a justice nominated. I think that will be very similar to Justice Gorsuch, and that man or woman will be confirmed. It's not going to be an easy process because unfortunately it's an ugly process. But the fact is there's going to be a new justice come the first Monday in October before the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah, and that's what it's going to be. But a president does have the right to appoint a justice that shares his judicial philosophy.
Absolutely.
And by the way, everybody should kind of be happy with Donald Trump's judicial philosophy in this sense. He doesn't believe in legislating from the bench. He believes in checks and balances and separation of powers. And he doesn't want, the left has always tried, and I'll throw this to Greg Jarrett, they have tried to achieve things through the courts that they would never achieve through the ballot box.
Right.
Because they legislate through the bench, and that is not the role of a judge.
No, and the perfect example is the travel ban, the Ninth Circuit, the so-called Nutty Ninth, is composed largely of liberal justices who view the Constitution, as they did the travel ban, incorrectly. They view it in a very elastic sense, a present day sense. It can mean whatever they want it to mean at any given time on any given day for any given issue. And people like Scalia and other reliable conservatives view it narrowly, strict constructionalists or originalists. And we will interpret it according to how it was written and what it meant at the time. And that's important because I think it was David Schoen who mentioned a moment ago, if you want to, change a constitutional principle, there's a way to do it. It's called amend the Constitution or enact a new amendment to the Constitution. So that's the way you do it.
That's for example, the Convention of States, which we support, conventionofstates.com.
Right.
That's in the Constitution.
It is.
All right, let's get final thoughts. David Schoen, where is this going to go? How soon will the president make his announcement?
I think the president needs to make an announcement very soon. I think, again, this country needs stability in every realm. I'm looking for someone straight, fair, and honest. I tell you this, he appointed someone to the 11th Circuit this term, Kevin Newsom. I wrote a letter for him. He's maybe as right-wing as they come, but my experience with him was that he was fair, honest, and called it straight. I may not win my civil rights cases with him, but I want a guy who's going to call it straight on the Constitution.
Newsom is a good pick. He was born in 1972. He's young enough he could be there a long time.
Last word. Let me go to Jay Sekulow.
Well, look, I think it'll happen, I think, in short order, but there is a process. The term of the Supreme Court is over. Doesn't mean the work's, but it does slow up in the summer. The justices are not meeting. They do not come back for a major conference until right before that first Monday in October when they have the main conference on cert petitions. So that is request for review. I'm going to have a case up there again that'll be seeking review. So there's time, but it needs to move swiftly and expeditiously, and I think that's what you're going to see, Sean.
All right, I want to thank you all for being with us. Great analysis by all of you, three very smart attorneys, and I actually think all three of you would be qualified to be on the Supreme Court because you're all lawyers that I would hire. And in the case of Jay Sekulow, I actually have at one point. Jay Sekulow, thank you. Greg Jarrett, great to see you. Looking forward to the book coming out in July. And David Schoen, as always, we appreciate your input.